Right. Well, round two. Reiner Kipp's been with us for about 18 months and quite honestly has invigorated the club with his enthusiasm. I think there is quite a change over the last few months or over the last year. Reiner has a great amount of experience, having been in the equivalent of the Gliding Soaring Association in the German Air Force, and then went on to become CFI of the German Alpine Soaring School. And one of his former students, who's an instructor there, gave an excellent talk, because I think he did talk last year on a flight of 800 kilometers in a K6CR. So just shows you what you can do. Anyway, Ryan is going to talk about field landings. On our last session, Phil was talking on about was going on about the field database and about the peculiarities of landings in and the difficulties in landing in mountain terrain. And Ryan is actually going to discuss how we actually do it, because it's not like flying down south. We've spoken about flying down south, and it is easier. Up here, we do have challenges, and so we have to prepare for it. So without further ado, I'll pass you across.
I think I've got one. Thank you. So there will not be much on a presentation. I'm just talking about the field landing and have just a few pictures. Sorry, partly in German because I wasn't able to translate them that quickly. Sant only asked me about a week ago, so a little more than a week ago, to do this. So, and I'm occupied in a different thing at the moment, so yeah, I'll try. So I will just start off with what Ron said before. You have to be current and you need to know your glider. And the best thing that you can do is take your own field, and I think Phil already mentioned it, take your own field and start practice spot landings, which is the most important thing for an outlanding. Outlanding fields, in general, in the flatland, we're not talking about the flat land, we're talking about hills and mountainous areas, are shorter than the usual landing areas. Our south field here could be a standard outlanding field, but in some regions we only have half of that. So start practicing, and if you're not fit, just take a two-seater, take an instructor and do landings, spot landings anywhere. Our field provides us with the south field with a links strip, albeit rough, but it can be done. In the center there is a good strip. You can, if there is no other, or when you're the last one, try to be the last one at one day, then you can use this area. You can use this area. You can even go in here over the rough ground and try spot landing after the track. So you have every opportunity to try spot landings before you actually leave your field. And you should. Everyone should be able to land in a field of, let's say, 300 meters length, be able to touch down in the first third and get to stop in the second third, so that you have a third of the field left. If you can manage that, then you're fit for outlandings from the spot landing area. Phil?
Sorry, just on that, you mentioned it. The south field is 300 meters long.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Portmoak south field is 300 meters long from the most extreme southeasterly end to the northwesterly end. So Reiner's one third can be easily applied to the south field.
Okay. Yeah, we will come back later when we do this, how to go to a landing field. But before that, in mountainous areas, we said we have shorter fields, and what we also have the fields are not level. The fields have either cambered to one side or going uphill, going downhill. So one general rule to the wind, we'll come to the wind later, one general rule is it's better to land uphill than into wind, because uphill eats up your energy while taxing on the ground later on. You will need a little more energy to round out uphill, but you will need a little bit more energy anyway, because you don't really know what the local wind and turbulence conditions are. So how do we assess the wind? First question, in a mountain. Yes, we have our weather forecast with the general direction of the wind. But the more mountainous it gets, the more local wind systems start to influence your decisions. So how do we assess this? The first thing is, I would like to show you the sun shines on the mountains. And you see which mountain or which hill flank is the most shone by on the sun and has the most energy. And this is important to see the bigger picture of local wind systems. During the day, you have different types. You see, it depends on what the thermals do during the day. At night, there's cold air in the valleys, and it slowly flows out of the valley if the valley is open. If the valley is not open, and here is a ridge or something, then you have like a lake, cold air. And this is also true late in the day. The later you go in the day, we'll come to that later. So early during the day, the sun shines onto the first ridges, peaks, and starts to generate thermals. You still have the outflowing wind. So when you're too fast, leaving here too fast, and you get into an area and come down below the line where the thermals are, and you have to do an outlanding, you can you have partly this flowing wind and an inversion in the valley. Later on, when the sun is higher up, you have the sun and you have the shade on the other side of the valleys. So in the valley, there is a flow this way. Like each valley has this own system of rolling air. And depending on where the main wind comes from, and this rolling air moves. So you might have a very nice field, but the field is in a downdraft. That's why I said before that you always should have a little bit of excess energy, mainly speed in our parlance. During the normal day, you have the sun everywhere and thermals everywhere, so easy. But when there are thermals all over the mountains, you always have a slight wind up the valley. When you go further during the day, towards the evening, we have the same as in the morning, that the first side, the shade sides, the cold air flows down. On the other side, the thermals are still working. You still have a slight wind up the valley, but it's decreasing. And at some point in the evening, hopefully when you're still in the mountains and have to land out, you will find this. The valley floor is still warm and generates some air. From both sides down the valley, the cold air comes to the middle and lifts the warm air. And you have a slight upwind in the middle of the valley. If the valley is steep enough with your glide angle and is long enough, you can make it out of the valley, just in the middle. And you will always have, so from about 300-400 meters or 1,000 feet above the valley floor, you will even have a slight lift component that gets you further on. If you have to land in this, it might give you, in your final turn, a lift. So bear this in mind for later on when we go to the how to actually do the field landing. So, but the next picture would be later, the first one we had. The cold air is in the valley. It fills the valley up like water, the cold air, and you have the inversion again. Okay, so when you have this in mind, the whole picture, you can, when you come to an area where you feel, no, I have to land out, and question, what is the height that you should really think about landing out, even with an engine, because your engine might not start? What is the height?
Well, I think
The decision height?
that depends on the area that you're in. If you're in the mountains, you have to be within gliding range of an airfield, of a landing point. So on a thermal day, basically, if you're finding that you're not getting the energy that you want, then you start positioning yourself to get into an area where there is a landable area. Now, as far as myself is concerned, by 1,500 feet, I am in an area whereby I am in effectively the circuit area of my landing field, and the minimum height that I will start the engine, having planned my circuit, the minimum height that I will start, I initiate the start personally for me is 1,000 feet with a turbo.
That's a good decision. So the decision for your outlanding starts with a glide angle to your next field. The database, Phil gave the database, but if you're, for any reason, are without the outside of the area that you can reach one, you have to look for a field. Fields can be smaller. And the first rule for this is, it doesn't matter whether the glider will be damaged. The most important thing is that you yourself, that the people inside you and perhaps the second person, just have a good chance of walking away. Every crash you can walk away from is a good landing. And in mountainous areas, it's very important. For example, you find mountainous areas with a lot of cattle. You find very, very many fences. Even on an uphill, it looks fine, the field, but it has got fences. What's the best thing for a fence? Where do you aim? Always aim for the post, because the post will flatten the fence and the wire will go under your fuselage. If you go in between the fences, it can rip your cockpit, could even strangle you. So that's why the Dutch had these funny bars in their cockpits to prevent them from having or from being strangled by wire. So for us, we don't have this. When you do an outlanding, just aim for the post. We don't want that. So stay within the area, decide early enough where to go, and stick to that field. If you're on the way to there, find something, sure, you can thermal, get away, try, get away, but always have your next field in mind. When I see a field, I can make a decision. What's better, grass or something where a farmer has got his plow through? Question. Any idea? In mountainous areas? Mountainous areas, we're speaking of where the plow's gone through. You have fewer possibilities of stones. Every lane you see, you can see the plowing lanes in a field. Where the farmer is able to plow, there's no obstacle. If you have a post, something, the farmer will plow this way, and you will see it. So where the farmer can plow, we can land. The only thing in mountainous areas is the steeper the fields are, the more the farmers start. Let's say this is the slope. The farmers won't plow this way, they will plow along the ridge, this way, to prevent the water from getting their soil away, eroding their slopes. So it doesn't matter, even if it's this way. For us, always upslope is more important than into the wind, because it takes off your energy. Wind, local wind systems, you can just, when you look at a valley, you can roughly make out where the wind comes from in the valley, when you know how a valley thermal system works. And it works anywhere in the world. In every valley in the world, it works the same way. When you have thermals, the valley wind system will always be thermal first, because the main wind, the higher wind speeds, they are up above, and they only influence a few hundred feet. Unless you have very strong wind, and then it's wave, and there's no longer thermals, and then the whole is totally different, and you really have to stick in a glide angle towards a landable field, preferably an airfield. So, how do we do an outlanding then? We've found our field. We know we want to land in this direction. And mentally, we do the thirds. Our reference point, we just come back to what you've learned, basic. This is now more or less basic knowledge. You set yourself a point, a reference point. And the reference point should be roughly 2 lengths of your fuselage into the field. Otherwise, you might end up like John with his super stall, hitting the fence. Yeah. So we say 300 meters. So 2 lengths, that means about a third into the first third is the reference point. Now, our standard procedure would be at home, I'll just take the blue one for what we would do at the home field. High key, downwind, 45, base, and final. That's what we do. When you have space enough in the flat land, you can do this. It's no problem. In mountainous areas, you sometimes don't have the space to do this. Standard. So the best way to do it one point. You fly with your altimeter set to QNH when you go cross country. So you roughly know from your map or whatever electronic device you have how high the valley is, how high the floor is, or the landing field, roughly. It doesn't matter whether it's 100 feet more or less. You have good brakes on most gliders anyway. So you know roughly what you have here. So normally it would be roughly 800 feet at high key. If you aim for 800 feet high key, then you can fly along this field at the upper end towards your high key. This way, you can always check the field again, and you will see if there are fences in there or whatever is in there, every obstacle, and you can mentally be prepared. If you see fences, you are mentally prepared. Okay, if I come down and there is the fence and I will hit the fence, I will hit the pole. Things like that. Just the mental preparation is important. From there, you start what you should not do at home, a curved approach. You always need to see your reference point in the whole process. So you are going this way into the field. And when you start here, beam the reference point, this is the moment where you unlock your brakes, your air brakes, and never lock them again from there on. I've experienced quite a few people, not only students, but also licensed or pilots, bronze plus CCSO, qualified pilots, when they do their normal approach at the home field, that when they see, okay, I don't need the brakes, they lock them again. And then when they need them, especially when they're low, they rip them out, and then the pilot-induced oscillations start. So from here onwards, on an outlanding, you just take them, unlock the brakes. You don't need to take them out. And your final, more or less the final turn into the field, that is the position where you should have them half your brakes. If you have the brakes half and you have about 10% above your normal final speed, this is the energy that you manage. Ron said it before. This is the energy management. If you go around with brakes half, 10% more speed, you have enough speed even to go a little bit uphill, and you have enough way in both ways. If you come into a downdraft, you put your brakes in, extend your glide angle towards the field. If you go into a lift, you get them a little more out, go up so that you are on your constant glide angle towards the field. And at this moment, it's very important that you only check your speed with a glance. So you need to be very current on your glider to know where the ASI is, so that you only have to glance at it, because you need to keep your visual outside. Very important.
Can I make a point?
Yeah.
I completely agree about the curved approach. And I think to emphasize that, if you're doing a curved approach, and as you say, you've got the brakes unlocked, and what you're actually doing, again, as you rightly point out about, speed management, what you're actually looking at is constant perspective. Your touchdown point, the perspective remains the same. And what you do is you just either reduce the bank or increase the bank to arrive, at your touchdown point. There is, if I might say so, particularly for more inexperienced pilots, the thing you have to remember with the use of air brakes is that if, for example, you have air brake at 45 degrees bank, your stalling speed will have increased as well. And so that, when we're talking about excess energy, right, you're talking about 10%, one must be aware that as you increase your bank, if you start to get it excessive, your stall speed is increasing. Would you like to make a comment about that at all?
Yes,
Reiner?
the 10% speed increase, I said, is above your normal speed. And if you are flying with 45-degree bank and brake slightly open, you already know that 45 degrees, what's the rule of thumb? 1.2. So you already have to have 20% more speed than your normal speed in this attitude. And then give another 10% on to that, because these don't change. These normal is 1, 45 degree 1.2, 60 1.4. This is the rule of thumb for your speed anyway, whether your brakes are out or your brakes are in. Doesn't matter. Your stall speed with half brakes will not go over these 20% or 40%.
I have a problem with that. With the whole thing is that I'm a great proponent of doing a curved approach, but this is not what we teach. and this is not what we teach. And I find it, because that's the way you do field landings, in my opinion, exactly as you're describing.
Yeah.
But we don't teach it.
This is the point. We teach this up to standard. That's fine. That's already on the way to curved approach. In most countries on the continent, you have a rectangular circle, even in gliders. So this is more towards it. And as I said, try to use our own field with spot landings. And if you've talked to the duty team, and the duty team knows, and especially when you're with an instructor, you can do these curved approaches also at your local field. If everybody knows that you're deviating from the standard, then it's perfectly fine. And I think we should encourage this in general. But talk to people so that everybody knows that something is not in the standard. Ron.
If you look at the curved approach there and compare it with the blue line, which you've done for the standard circuit, you're not that far away from it at all times, apart from the higher end, at the high key. So it's not that much more difficult than flying a standard circuit.
Yeah, it's just a comment, Kate.
Well, I believe the BGA changed the circuit because they noted that pilots did do curved approaches into fields. So they cut the corner off. And as you say, the shape isn't very different. Where I would make a comment is about when you open the air brakes. And we do teach people to be pretty cautious about opening air brakes in the turn, partly as Santa Serv affects the stalling speed, but I would say even more so because your rate of descent, if you pull out air brakes in a turn, may be an awful lot higher than you expected, particularly if there's a big wind gradient and it's turbulent. And personally, on a gusty day, I would prefer a straight approach where I'm not going to have the air brakes out too early and throw away height before I wanted to.
Well, I didn't say take them out. I said unlock them, that you have the possibility to use them without being then, sometimes some gliders, you have really difficulties to unlock them.
I think the DG 505.
GD is a very just unlock them so
Yeah.
that you don't have to think about unlocking them in a difficult approach. When you're in a difficult approach and you have bang, you need your brakes, and then you start ripping them out, and normally everyone who pulls something wants to get a different an opposing force, and this opposing force is the stick, and that's counterproductive. So just unlock them and then go.
It's also good to unlock the brakes, not flat.
Yes. Oh yes.
It's good to unlock them that you've actually.
Yes.
I've been away.
Flaps and undercarriage. That was 1 point. Thank you, Phil. Flaps and undercarriage have to be set for landing here before you reach high Q, before you start your curved approach.
Okay, good. Just ask a question about it. I mean, I'm at a high key point in neutral flap in the fences, for example. When I'm doing it, just regular flying, I'm at neutral flap all the way downwind. I then go to +1 on the diagonal leg because I feel comfortable I'm going to make it, and then along the base leg, very comfortable I'm getting in, I go to +2. So I do play with the flaps in the circuit, as in play with them, I set them.
Well, you're very proficient on your glider.
You think? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. You would make. I think we're talking about this group to learn something, and a proficient pilot who has hundreds of hours on his specific glider, I think they adapt the basic structure. But someone who's learning, who is perhaps in the stress of his first outlanding, should have as many points done before he finally starts this curved approach. So for a beginner, gear down, water open. If not, mostly you will have it out before that because it's getting worse. And flaps set to the landing position. I would say the middle landing position, not full landing. If I have an ASW 20, I can't put this to landing position there, but I'm perfectly fine with the ASW 20 to have first landing set or first positive and go around the whole. So that's the proficiency on your own glider.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. There's some gliders where you cannot go to landing flap until you are lined up on the field, such as a Nimbus 3, for instance.
Yeah.
You go into landing flap and then try turning. All you do is you just yaw the glider. You keep going in a straight line.
Yeah, that's why you need to be proficient on your glider. And
Absolutely.
especially when you have a different glider, and everybody flies a different glider with different flap setting. But when someone is new to his glider, he should try this. He should try this and have the setting so that he doesn't have to do another lever while in the final bit. You only have two hands. We're not octopi. So we only have two hands. So everything out, set. And I think I'm not wrong if every flap glider is on +1, you can do every landing everywhere, most likely. So yours doesn't have flaps.
It does, yeah.
It does. So yeah, you can try. And also this curved approach can be trained. And if, as I said, if the duty team knows, and if you say, we want to do it now, or I want to do it now, nobody will say, no, don't do it, other than there is loads and loads of traffic around you. But try, get proficient with your glider, and even try this. Even try it at your home field. Just get around and get into it. Sand.
I think a point that's got to be made about the curved approach is you don't want to be turning finals low, if you see my point.
Yeah, you won't turn finals below 300 feet.
Yeah,
above.
I mean, I'm not being funny about it. We used to do circling approaches in the Airbus A320 and the 21 for that matter. And our minimum height for wings level is 400 feet. And that's in a big aeroplane, right? So, in a glider, we're looking at 300 feet because the sort of thing you've got to be really careful about, particularly in mountainous areas, is wind gradient, as we do at any airfield. Because, and so this whole business of turning low and particularly slow close to the ground is bad news, particularly for bigger winged aircraft as well. I think that point's got to be made.
Okay. So let's go back. Before we start this, we need to be sure about the wind. I have assumed for this that the wind is anywhere in this sector. So when you have established either by calculating from your knowledge of the wind systems or actually looking down flags, dust, smoke will show you the wind direction. Always take your curved approach on the lee side.
In Scotland, it's water.
Water, yeah. See, on the lee side. Why? If you do this curved approach and the wind comes from here, you will at one point be either 90-degree bank or you've run out of space. So always to the lee side of your field. So wind, set up the glider. Remember, field is always, it's the gradient, the field, the slope gradient is more important landing uphill than into wind. And where a farmer has been busy plowing, you have fewer obstacles.
All right, can we make a little break? Having seen some of the fields around here in Scotland, I'm sure in the Alps, sometimes you may not have the luxury or terrain clearance to do a sort of standard nice wide circuit. So maybe on occasions, there's a couple of fields you have to be closer in and therefore slightly lower down. So you might even want to practice some of this 200 feet lower than you might enter the circuit, again with the duty instructor's clearance that you're going to be doing a low
curved approach
close in to the field because you don't have the terrain clearance in some of the strips.
Then sometimes you need, if you don't have the terrain clearance, you might need the air brakes earlier to be here. At this point, you should not be much higher than 500 above the field.
But it's above the ground where your finger is.
No, 500 above the touchdown. It could be that when there is a steep hill that you're really scraping along the edges.
Well, if you want to be 500, you could be quite close into the
closer.
So you're going to have to get ready to lose a lot of part.
Exactly. Okay. Any more question? Remarks?
All right. One point about wind direction. We've been talking about thermal days and on wave days. I mean, the sort of thing that I'm really quite cagey about the winds low down because you can get some strange effects. When the winds is above 10 knots, below 10 knots, then, as you described earlier, if the wind's below 10 knots, then you start getting these valley effects and all the rest of it. Well, once the wind starts going above 10, 15 knots, then it becomes more complicated. I mean, we're lucky in Scotland that we have locks that can give you the wind direction, and they can be surprisingly different to what the prevailing flow is. And one of the things I do when I'm doing a field landing, or I'm considering a field landing, is I always do a circle. And so while I'm looking at my fields and all this sort of stuff, because, if you leave it too late, you end up rushed and you start putting yourself in a high stress situation. It's a high stress situation anyway, because you're putting yourself in what I call a novel situation where you do not have a lot of experience in dealing with these situations. And so what you have to do is you have to make it a standard. You have to get into a habit of how you do things. And that's practice. But the thing that always leaving aside, couldn't agree more, that uphill is much more important than wind direction. But one of the things that I do is if I am in doubt as to what the wind direction is, I'll do 360s to find out where the wind's coming from.
Well, that's the wind at your height.
Second,
That's the wind at your height. Yeah.
And as far as altimeters, if I could make a point on that, I don't use a bloody altimeter.
No.
I just look at the ground. And what you do, which you have, is the UD, which will give you your GPS height above ground level, but that is right below you, right?
Yeah.
But at least you know what it is below you, so you've got an idea. Of what height you are. But altimeters, forget them. That's my attitude. Sorry. Any other? Sorry. There you go. No, sorry. That's it.
Okay. Well, I was fortunate in September last year, to be able to do the Broom Hall House event with the junior, because that was an outlanding for me. Absolutely, because that was a field. I was the first glider that ever landed there. So it was used in the Second World War, but not for gliders. But we were there in the morning with the tug to assess the field, whether we could tow out. But then coming there with the junior, and after releasing, I thought, oh, well, this is really an outlanding. It is. And I exactly did this for the first landing there. Curved approach, and it was fine. Everything nice. So training and doing it again and again is nice. And especially our younger pilots going cross country or having done their first cross countries, just train. And before you go to a competition, especially if you go to the Inter-Club League here in Scotland, where you have all this mountainous terrain, just do it here with a glider that you fly. And if you just ask an instructor, for example, you want to take the Perkers with an instructor, just ask that instructor that you're going with, just to train, just to do stuff here. Why not? It's money, it's value. And even days when there are no thermals, when we can do traffic circuits from the winch. You get 1,000 feet, and 1,000 feet is what you need to have to train, to practice these approaches. And even if we have an easterly wind, we have this strip here to practice in an easterly wind. Why not? Just try, just do. I can always encourage people to stay current, even in days when it's not soaring. One winch launch every month with the training of this is worth more than the 13 odd quid that it costs. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, there's another
question. Actually, one of the things I've always avoided on the hang glider on a windy day is landing at the convergence of valleys. Is that an issue for a sailplane to the same extent, you know, because of the turbulence of the converging air?
It can be, but normally on a conversion of valleys, you have one valley is smaller and one is wider, and the wider valley is the better option for a glider because you have more space for turning.
Right.
Okay.
So I've got a couple of questions. What about landing across an uphill slope? What have you got any comments on that?
If you have the length of the field only across, yes, you can do. Then you might have something like a slightly side slipping approach, and get the wings level to the ground, whatever it is at that moment, and then as soon as possible or practical, without changing the wings level to the ground, just with the rudder, turn the nose uphill. If you know what I mean, just turn the nose uphill, because then even if you touch the ground when you're already in the movement, it won't end in a ground loop. Just go uphill. It's perfectly possible. You can also land with side slope. Yes, but it's more difficult. Your approach is like side slipping into this. But the final decision is always the surface that you have. You need to be parallel to the surface. Even if you're slightly moving sideways, it doesn't matter. The gliders are very, very sturdy. They can have slightly sliding touchdowns if it's not asphalt.
And what about it being so steep that the glider may roll backwards? What do we do about that? Is there anything we do about that?
There was one thing that Phil said before: check that your wheel brake is fine. If the glider's rolling backwards, it will not roll far because one wing will be on the ground and it will slowly turn around that wingtip.
So put a wing down. Well, basically have a wing down.
Yeah, have a wing down. At the end, when you stop, make sure that there is one wing on the ground.
Yeah. So say that last point again. That just one. Sorry, just say that last bit again.
Just have one of the wings on the ground when you stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not both.
Yeah.
Well, it depends.
This point, forgive me, because I mean, field landings in the mountains it's a critical. It's really bloody critical. And you spoke earlier about posts and if you're going to hit a post, then hit straight on. To me, if I'm going to hit anything, and I brought it up a few weeks ago, if I'm going to hit anything, because this business about wire fences and all this sort of stuff, I know many instances where people have come close to being decapitated because of wires and so on. And my personal view is, if I'm going to hit it, I would prefer to hit it sideways. Do you have any comment? I'd rather ground loop.
Sideways is difficult. The sturdiest part of your glider is the nose in front of the cockpit. If you go okay, yes, but if you're landing out and you do a ground loop and go across, you are not sure that when you're in between posts, you're not sure exactly the wire will go under your wing and will be exactly at your height when you go sideways. It will be exactly at your height because it just comes under the wing. And when you hit the post, right, well, you need, you will need,
You're talking about dead nose on.
yeah, dead nose on.
I don't think, right?
I've seen both. I came to retrieve, it was just a K8. He landed in between posts. It was not even damaged from the posts, but he sat there until we came because he had the wire here. He sat in this K8 without being able to move for 3 hours.
There's somebody here in Patterson who
Yeah.
has a very bad accident with wires in South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Colin wants me.
Yeah.
It was just to make the point that in Scotland, I see more dry stain dikes than I do wire fences
Okay.
when I'm gliding. And in that case, I'm not looking to hit the dry stain dike.
no, that's
I'd
fine.
definitely be looking, if I've got 50 yards and I've still got 30 knots on,
Mhm.
I'm sticking
Just-
a wing on the
yeah.
ground and a rudder as hard as I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Change
would
that-
slide
change that
backwards.
into rotational energy rather than
Yeah.
translational energy to get
Yeah.
rid of it. The other point, Reichman suggests in his book, if you're landing up a slope in the mountains, where the slope is considerable, perhaps as much as 20 or 30 degrees, to land across it by making a curved round out.
Yeah.
That, and it's essential at that stage to sort of focus on the angle that the hill is at to make sure your wings are parallel with it, which is the point that you were making. But rather than then putting the nose up the hill, is to try to make sure that once you've got round to
That you're,
wings up and doing that way,
Yeah.
keep it going across the slope until you stop. To reduce the chance of running back severely. I've watched a K13 land just below Kinniston Crags. Why it landed there rather than just turning out into the valley, I'll never know. But it ran down about the 200 feet or so backwards, straight backwards, going one wing down, other wing down, one wing down, other wing down, until it eventually, after 3 or 4 cycles, turned 90 degrees before the guys could get out.
yeah. You mentioned Reichmann. After he wrote his book, he did one landing that way and put his wing down. It was very nice, but he had too much energy and the glider turned more than 90 degrees and he was starting to roll down the hill again. So, yeah.
Wonder, yeah, you've given us quite a lot of experience here, and even the sketching.
Quite a lot of experience coming through there, Reiner, and the sketches that you showed initially were sketches of proper mountains in the Alps.
Yeah.
And in Scotland, their mountains are trivial in comparison, I would suggest, a lot more rounded. And I'm wondering if the wind effects that you've described, the anabatic, katabatic winds, and I haven't found those as noticeable in Scotland. I don't know if anybody would, any other pilots would agree with that. I know. Yeah.
I've seen that effect at a point with the cold wind from the night before blowing down the valley and an easterly before that.
Coming down the D Valley.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find particularly early cross-country pilots will find themselves foul of is we're actually quite near the coast. And when we're early cross-country pilots have got a hesitancy to go into the mountains, so quite often they're making their early attempts on the more level arable farmland going up the east coast. And I know of at least 2 incidents where pilots had failed to notice that soaring conditions had stopped because sea breeze had come in.
Mhm.
So rather than taking advantage of the sea breeze to get back, they've landed out, not noticing that the wind had changed direction completely. And on both occasions, gliders went through the fences as you described. One of them was a Mosquito, which was pretty much written off. Wreckage was bought and rebuilt, and I flew it for a good few years after that. Wasn't me that stuck it through the fence, by the way.
Okay. Yeah.
If you have enough energy, when would you decide, rather than putting a wing down and ground looping, when would you decide just to hop over the fence? Like, you know, if the fence is small, like you see in quite a lot of competitions and stuff, like they can just hop over it. If you've got enough energy, would you ever decide to hop over instead of just ground lifting?
No, because then you don't know. You might find yourself in a bit of turbulent air, and you have enough energy before you're at the fence. You just start your hop, and then you have tailwind, and you're just above the fence, and then you will hit it this way.
Yeah. Oh yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's still on a very, very low approach. So, I mean, we've all seen gliders hop over fences. I've seen gliders do it over 2 or 3 large fields, actually, but they're still flying, basically. So, but if you've got the wheel on the ground, that's it. Flying over practically.
But I think it works if you're close to VNE,
Yeah.
not if you're close to touchdown speed.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Any more comments? Any questions? So the only thing I can say as final words is practice, practice, practice. Wherever, whenever possible, and with whomever you can grab who has experience. It doesn't matter if it's an instructor. You can ask any experienced pilot to sit in the back and talk you through, for example. Comment. Okay.
That's
Fine.
great. Well, thanks, Reiner. That's excellent. That was really good. Our next one is on the 28th of January. Subject still to be decided. But I think one of the points that I will make is that we're having these meetings during the winter, and up to now, every meeting that we've had has been on unflyable days, or here at Portmoat, the field's US at the moment because we're flooded. Now, one of the points that I did make right at the beginning, and is proving to be true, this is about weekend pilots, and as we can see, we haven't flown now for 9 weeks. We've not been able to do soaring flights for 9 weeks from the point of view of weekends, right? And I made the point right at the beginning that we only get about 5 or 6 weekends, if we're lucky, where we can actually go and soar cross country. Now, the purpose of these meetings is for us to be prepared for getting the right day. Now, we've got another 3 before we start coming to the summer, and we'll review how we do things in the summer. But the point I'm trying to make is that if on the 28th it's actually a soarable day, we will brief the night before and we'll go and fly. Chatting about it's one thing, but really what we really want to be doing is actually getting on and doing it, and that's the primary goal. And these talks are there to prepare ourselves, and it really does depend upon the amount of effort that you put in, to get the rewards. And we're providing the information, and it's up to you to get on with it. It's as simple as that. Okay.
I can offer every Tuesday as a training opportunity. I'm here every Tuesday with the Tuesday group, and we can do these trainings, the spot landing, whatever is necessary. We can also do on the Tuesday. There are some people who actually have time on Tuesdays, not only retired people, but also others.
So there we are. The facilities are there, so we just got to use it. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.